You had no idea that you had a son. Is that correct?
No, I didn't. I hadn't heard anything for 40 years. So it's like, well, I guess I don't.
So how did you two connect?
So my wife suggested I get a private investigator, and he found Tony in a couple days.
And that's a little over a year ago then.
Yeah, a little over a year ago. We met. In fact, we met each other 26th of January a year ago.
Welcome to Finding Family DNA, the show about finding and connecting birth families with your host, Jay Rosenzweig, founder and CEO of birthparentfinder.com. And now, here's Jay.
This is Jay Rosenzweig, the founder and CEO of birthparentfinder.com, and you're watching Finding Family DNA podcast. This is a special edition. We actually are recording in our studio right now. We're just waiting to see what happens with season 2. And with me today is Misty Gillis. Misty, say hi.
Hi.
Misty, we got so much going on right now. And I'm excited because if you look behind me on the middle shelf, you'll see the Davey Award that our podcast received from the Davey Awards for podcast series, interview, and talk show. I was shocked that we got this, and we're part of some of our episodes. And again, it was wonderful receiving that award. And I gave Chris his award a couple months ago, and we've shared that on our social media. So Misty, thank you for being part of our podcast.
Hey, it's happy to be involved. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So real quick, before we get into today's story, coming up March 6th to March 8th is Roots Tech. Roots Tech is a conference. It's the largest family history conference in the world. It's in Salt Lake City. And you and I were invited to do the Finding Family DNA podcast at Roots Tech this year. That's pretty exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you're going to be there with me. I'm very excited. We don't see each other more than once or twice a year, so this will be good. I'm also seeing you in September at the World Association of Detectives Conference, their 100th anniversary, and they've invited us to speak at their conference.
That's right, in Chicago, right?
Yes, and not too far from where you are. So We have a lot going on. And lastly, before we bring in our guests, WGN Chicago. This April, what's going to be happening there, Misty?
So they are filming, they're currently editing new episodes for the backstory broadcast that Larry Potash does. And there'll be a special visit from Birth Parent Finder on that series.
And that's like an hour show, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't know the date in April, but we'll let everyone know when that airs. And you will be representing our company and telling a story about someone's family history.
That's right.
And on that note, we are going to bring in two people, Greig Watson and Anthony McDermott, birth father and birth son who found each other through Ancestry DNA. And first, I want to bring in Anthony, goes by Tony, lives in Southern California. Anthony, first of all, welcome to the show. And second of all, what made you take a DNA test?
I guess growing up, I grew up with an adopted sister also, and she was always in contact with her mom, so she kind of knew her background and stuff. But I was never in contact with either of my birth parents, so it was always in the back of my mind. I was always curious to see any connection of my background to how I am today, and just the mix of nature versus nurture always interested me because I was kind of different from the family I grew up with, but the same in some ways too. So it was always something that I wanted to do. It was just kind of, worked out at that certain time that I decided, I'm going to take a DNA test with the ancestry and see what shows up.
And you are biracial, correct?
Yes.
And tell me about your adopted parents. Were they white? Were they black?
My adopted mom is white and my adopted dad is mixed, Irish, Polynesian, and Mexican.
And tell me briefly about growing up. How did that work out?
I grew up in also a very mixed family. I have 6 other cousins who are adopted, so I definitely shared the experience, and we all have different experiences of being adopted. A couple of my cousins, they were adopted from Russia. A couple of my cousins, they were adopted. Their mom was from Minneapolis area. And she was friends with my aunt, and she couldn't take care of them. So my aunt my aunt and uncle took on them and adopted them to grow up with their 3 kids. So I definitely had a wide influence or a wide experience of growing up with adopted people and in a very mixed family.
So that's very healthy, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Because a lot of times we have cases where they don't have that experience. They're either an all black family with a white child or an all white family with a black child, and they're curious about their original heritage. So when did you take this DNA test?
I believe it had to be 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And when I first took it, I think the closest connection was maybe like a second or third cousin in the Midwest area. And I kind of sent messages around to the people that were closest to me to see if anybody would talk to me or had any idea of connections or anything. And I kind of hit a wall. So I kept looking at it, kept checking up on it, but it kind of went about maybe a year or two that I had looked at it until I got a call from my biological father, who was also, I ran into me doing the same thing.
Well, and that brings up Greig Watson. Greig, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. And tell me, Greig, why did you take the DNA test?
So I was actually doing the same thing. I was looking for information from my birth father. I was brought up with a stepfather. My mother didn't know much about my birth father. I was curious too, and got information along the way all the time I was growing up, and even when I was an adult, that everything was conflicting. So I wanted to find out. My mother passed in 2023. After she passed, I took the DNA test. And I went to 23andMe first and didn't really get much out of that. I mean, a little bit, but not much information. Then I went to Ancestry, took the DNA test, and I was curious, was waiting on the results, and finally got them, opened them up, and I'm expecting to see stuff from my biological father's background. First thing I saw was Anthony McDermott. I thought, holy stuff that I can't say. I was shocked. And so I went and I emailed them right away through Ancestry, but I didn't hear back. Checked the internet to find pictures and stuff, and finally on classmates.com found this picture. I thought, wow. And I'm like, wow. It was crazy. It was unbelievable. I knew Ancestry wasn't lying.
You had no idea that you have or had a son. Is that correct?
No, I didn't. I mean, as a man, over the years, sometimes you suspect things or you may think about things, but I hadn't heard anything for 40 years. So it's like, well, I'm not going to, I guess I don't, so I didn't know. So it was a shock. Yes.
So how did you two connect?
I didn't hear from him. So my wife suggested I get a private investigator to get his information, to see if they can find him. And talked to Mike Rood Associates up here in Antioch. And he found Tony in a couple days. And I didn't hear from him. Didn't hear from Mike right away. And I thought, well, I guess they didn't want to talk to me. And I said, no, he does. He needs a couple days of process. So, okay, cool. All right. And then finally, Saturday, either right about Thanksgiving of 23, we talked the first time.
And that's a little over a year ago then.
Yeah, a little over a year ago. We met. In fact, we met each other 26th of January a year ago.
And then whose idea was it to try to find his birth mother?
Well, I knew he'd been looking for her, so and he had trouble. So I figured, well, let's try and see what we can do. And Mike recommended you, and that's when I got in contact with you.
We looked at the case. It's a case that could only be solved with DNA.
Right.
And it was a little too complicated for me, so I brought in Misty Gillis, our genealogist extraordinaire. And Misty, tell us how you solved this case.
When I looked at the matches, which was great because we had the paternal side already because Greig had tested, so I knew exactly which side was the maternal side. And there was a top match up there that was about 330 centimorgans named Anne, and she was born a generation above Tony. So because she shares about 330 to 337 centimorgans with Tony, I knew that she's a first cousin of once removed, meaning one of her first cousins is Tony's biological mother. And so I took the information that we had and I started building out Anne's tree. And I noted that on her father's side, her family was very vast. On her mother's side, the family was much smaller, but they were also from Norway. And when I looked at the shared matches between Anne and Tony, a lot of the other matches had ties to Norway. So that told me that Tony's connection to Anne is on Anne's maternal side, that Norway side. And so what I did was I looked at all the first cousins on that side, and the majority of them did live in like Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. I came across one specifically, a woman named Gail that was a sibling of Anne's mother. And she married a man with a very unique surname. And when I was going through Tony's DNA matches, I found other connections to this very unique surname. So when I looked at Gail and her husband, they only had 2 daughters. They had a son as well, but I know that we were looking for the mom. So we had 2 daughters. One was born in 1960 and one was born in 1962. And based off the information we had from Tony's letter that he had received from his biological mother, we knew that the biological mother was 19 at the time, and one of the daughters was 19 at the time. So I did some research on her. She actually grew up in North Dakota. She lived in North Dakota for a very long time, had strong ties there. So what I did was actually run that information by Greig first. So I gave him her name and kind of the area that she grew up in and as much information as I kind of could find about her. And he saw a picture of her and said, this definitely kind of rings some bells. I can't say 100%, but, you know, it looks like this could be viable.
So let me interrupt real quick. So Greig, this is obviously someone you had a relationship with when you were in college, right?
Yeah, it had to have been a short encounter because I didn't really remember much about it.
And this was in North Dakota where you went to school?
Yeah, I went to University of North Dakota, yes.
And then now is it all coming to place, or is it just still groggy, or just?
It's weird because I remember a lot of events from that particular time. And, but that, yeah, still kind of a little bit groggy. I mean, it's coming into focus. I think about seeing a picture of her at that time. It probably would ring more bells, you know, but I saw a present picture of her and, you know, it raised a few bells, but I saw a picture from her from 1982, 81, 82. I probably would ring a few more bells.
And then Misty, you contacted her, and how did that go?
It actually went really well. So I left her a voicemail originally, and I was kind of vague, just said that, you know, I'm trying to get a client in touch with some family members of his, and I left his birthday in the message and said, if this sounds familiar, can you call me back? And I followed up with a text message, and within about 30, 45 minutes, she called me back and said, I did receive your message. She said, that birthday does ring a bell, but can you explain to me exactly what's going on? So I started from the beginning, and I told her the whole story. And she said, yep, that's me. And she said, I'm his biological mother. And I was like, okay. And she said, I actually went to the University of North Dakota as well. And she shared some information about that time there. She actually was under the impression that Tony had access to his original birth certificate this entire time. And so she didn't realize that he did not know what her name was outside of doing this DNA test.
That's interesting. When you spoke to her, did she say she wanted to speak with Tony?
Oh yeah, she was very, very laid back, very easygoing. She talked a little bit about her time, and then she said that, yeah, she would love to connect with Tony. And so I was able to provide Tony with her contact information. She was busy the following day, but she was free the weekend after. So I'm excited to hear if Tony actually talked to her and how that went.
So before we talk about that conversation, let's go back, Tony, to the letter that she sent you first. What was in that letter, if you don't mind sharing?
I mean, without getting into too many details, she was pretty much just saying that she for sure 100% wanted to go through with the pregnancy, but she knew at that time she was just very reluctant on whether she would be able to provide a good upbringing. So she said it was the hardest decision she had made up to that point, and she decided to give me up for adoption to try to find, you know, a better a place for me to be raised at. So that's pretty much it. Was about a page letter. It wasn't a really long letter, but it just kind of got into her mindset of where she was at that time, and just the adversity she was facing to actually go through with putting me up for adoption.
And you saw that letter when for the first time?
Actually, it's crazy. I think I remember reading it when I was younger, but when I was 18, I had joined the military, and the military needed whatever I had received from the adoption agency, which was a small profile of my mother and a small profile of my birth father. And when I read the mother, okay, that made sense. When I read the profile of the father, it didn't make sense because it just the description of him and everything, it didn't really make sense that that's where I came from. So I handed that in, but I don't remember ever seeing that letter until I told my birth parent or my adoptive parents last year that, hey, I got in contact with my biological father. We've talked and stuff like that. My adopted mom asked, well, are you still interested in finding your mom? And I'm like, well, yeah. But the issue I had ran into was the adoption agency that they used back then is no longer in business, and all my records got pushed off to another adoption agency. And there was a big old paper trail that you'd have to go through to get that info. But she's like, well, I do have a letter from your mom that I don't know if you remember reading it, but I can give you the whole folder of what I have. And so she gave it to me, and I read the letter, and that's where it was like, okay, well, yeah, I'm definitely ready to find it.
So your adopted parents were on board this whole time with you finding your birth family, correct?
Yeah, I've known since I was old enough to, like, it was one of my first memories was my adopted parents sitting me and my sister down, and I was probably like 5 or 6, and they told us that, that they couldn't have kids themselves, so they wanted to, provide a family for, kids who needed it, and that's why they adopted us. And so yeah, they've always been open, and like I said, my sister, her mom wanted to keep in touch with her, so growing up, they exchanged letters. They met a few times, and she had only met her mom at that point, and she actually met her dad for the first time a couple of years ago. And that's when she got kind of on me about, hey, you need to do the same thing because we're not getting any younger. So
Your conversation with your birth mother, how did that go, and where does it stand now?
it went good. We talked actually a couple of times already. The first time, obviously, it was just surreal because I'm 42 years old now, so it's just all that wondering and throughout my whole life, and now just meeting my dad last year, and then knowing that, hey, like right now, my mom's only a phone call away, and it was just surreal to finally talk to her and just see where how quickly we got along, and we had a good conversation, and we probably talked for about an hour and a half for the first conversation, and then we exchanged Facebook pages, and I sent her a few pictures of her grandkids, and about a week later, a couple of days ago, we talked again for a little bit just to catch up on everything.
Now, did she tell her family about you?
Well, that's what I asked. I'm like, well, does any of, if you talk to any of your family about it? And both of her parents have passed away, but she said that she talked to her friends about it, and I think her sister, and they were all excited for her, and hoping that everything turns out good. And yeah, so she's definitely open about it, and she was just she was happy that I finally got a hold of her, because the agreement that she had when she gave me up for adoption was that she could not contact me, but I could contact her. So it was completely out of her power for us to meet. So it would have had to been up to me.
Now, does she have kids?
She's not married right now, but she did say that about a year later she had another son that she gave up for adoption. So I do have another half brother out there somewhere that she said he hasn't contacted her yet.
Interesting. And obviously he's not on DNA, or else Misty would have let us know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have shown on mine too. So yeah.
Right. Did she remember Greig?
Yeah, she did. She's like, oh yeah, I remember Greig. She's like, we lived. She's like, I believe we lived in the same apartment complex, and we would hang out once in a while in the grassy area, and between the buildings. And she's like, yeah, I remember him.
Getting personal now, did she mention why she never told Greig that she was pregnant and placed a baby for adoption?
You really didn't get into that. She just wanted got into she kind of told me how, since she was from North Dakota, I was wondering how I was born in Hennepin County in Minneapolis. And she said that she just didn't want to go home because, she didn't want to answer all the questions and go through all the drama. So she had moved in with, I believe, her aunt that lived in Minneapolis area. And because her aunt suggested, hey, like, there's a safe space, you can come and stay with us and we'll help you through this time. So that's how I was born in Minneapolis.
Got it. So Greg, you've known Tony now for about what, 14 months?
Something like, yeah, just about.
And when did you guys meet?
The 26th of January last year.
Okay, so probably within a couple months of finding out, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
We talked about these cases before where so many people aren't receptive, birth fathers, birth mothers. They say there's a reason why we placed you for adoption.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want any part of your life. But obviously in this case, with the birth mother being receptive and you being receptive, tell me about how you feel and why you are so receptive.
I mean, I guess I consider it a blessing. I wish I had known earlier, but it was great. It was I don't know. It was just a great thing. Have another family member, another child. My kids have another sibling. It's all about family, I guess. And it's considered a blessing.
And that's a healthy way to look at it. And how many kids do you have?
Altogether 4.
And when you told them about this, what did they say?
Everybody was receptive. I have a 10-year-old, and I have a 31-year-old, and I have a 23-year-old. So the 10-year-old was very happy. Well, all of them were very happy. They just took it in stride.
So you guys, where did you meet?
We met at the Subway in San Bernardino. Last year, I was on my way to Vegas, and we stopped and met there. And then we met again. We got all the family together in L.A. in April of last year. And then we went to Monterey, the aquarium last year. I took the little one, and then Anthony brought his family.
So Anthony's met your entire family, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Met everybody.
And Anthony, are you married?
Yeah, actually, I have. Me and my wife live down here. I met her when I moved down here about 20 years ago, and we have 18-year-old daughter who's about to graduate, and we have a set of 13-year-old triplets.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. This is a great story, and I know when Greg initially spoke with Linda from my office, who took this case, she said, "Jay, this is a fantastic story. We would love to see the outcome, and we hope that the birth mother is receptive." And sure enough, not only obviously Greg is receptive, and Greg was the one who hired us on your behalf. Obviously, you know that. And we, like I said, we were just hoping the birth mother was on board, and Misty put this together. She did an amazing job. And Misty, sometimes we take a deep breath and we realize what's going to happen, how this is going to turn out. Isn't that right, Misty?
That's the thing, is you can do the whole genealogy and investigative process, but at the end of the day, it really just hinges on how that other person's going to receive the information you're giving them.
Right.
And I know that, Tony, you need to get back to work in a few minutes. I said this would be a half an hour, and we're right on schedule. So I don't think I left anything out. Misty, do you have any questions for them?
No, but I do want to say, Greg, I deal with a lot of biological fathers in my work.
Mhm.
And I have nothing but utmost respect for you and the way that you've handled this and welcomed Tony into your life. And Tony, you're very blessed for that. And I think you're both wonderful. I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Now, lastly, Greg or Anthony, let's start with Greg. What would you like to say to Anthony?
Glad I found you, man. Glad I found you. Or we find each other, or however, whatever happened. I was shocked, but it was a good shock. So,
I guess the same thing. I've always felt blessed to have the adoptive family that I have, and just like the first thing you said, or one of the things you first said when we first talked, was like, "Hey, now you're even more blessed because now you got 2 dads."
Well, again, it's such a happy ending, and we don't call it an ending. We call it a new beginning for everyone. And again, thank you both for being on here. Thank you, Misty. And again, this is the Finding Family DNA podcast. We're kind of like in a hiatus, but this is like an extra thing that we're doing, a special. And again, thank everyone, and we'll see everyone again real soon.
If you want exclusive bonus segments of these episodes, join our Patreon at patreon.com/findingfamilydna. And if you are looking to start the journey of finding your family DNA, just go to birthparentfinder.com. Thank you for joining us on Finding Family DNA.
What's up is down, what's left is right. Chasing stars.